Kamala Harris has told her story clearly and often. A black mother from India, a South Asian father from Jamaica, two cultures meeting in one American life. But when genealogists traced her maternal DNA, the markers pointed somewhere the public narrative had never reached. The ancestry was older, more layered, and more historically charged than the version most people know. What the science found changes the picture entirely. Before we dive in, comment where you are watching from and click subscribe. Kamala Harris has described her background the same way across decades of public life. Her mother, Shamala Gopalan, came from Chennai, Tamil Nadu, arriving in the United States in 1958 as a young graduate student with a scholarship and little else. Her father, Donald Harris, came from Jamaica, eventually becoming a Stanford economics professor. Two immigrants, two distinct cultures, one daughter who would become the first woman, first Black American, and first South Asian American to serve as Vice President of the United States. It is a story that carries genuine weight, and Harris has never shied away from it. She has spoken about grinding spices in her grandmother's Chennai kitchen, about the Tamil traditions woven into her childhood, about the Jamaican patois that shaped her father's speech. The identity she presents is specific, proud, and deliberately held. But identity narratives, even honest ones, are always selective. They begin where memory begins, where family stories were passed down, where the oldest living relative could reach. They do not begin where the DNA begins, and those are rarely the same place. Ancestry science operates on a different timeline than personal memory. It does not start with grandparents or great-grandparents. It starts with haplogroups, genetic markers inherited unchanged through maternal or paternal lines across hundreds of generations. It reads migration patterns written into human cells before any nation existed, before any culture had a name for itself. It finds ancestry that no family story survived to tell. When genealogists and genetic researchers began tracing the ancestral lines connected to Harris's family, they were not looking to challenge her identity. They were following the evidence. What they found did not contradict the story she has told. It ran underneath it, deeper and further back, into histories that no living relative could have remembered and no single cultural label could contain. The public narrative had a beginning. The DNA had a different one. And the distance between those two starting points is where the real story lives. Shamala Gopalan was born in 1938 in Chennai, a city that sits on the southeastern edge of the Indian subcontinent, where the Bay of Bengal meets land that has been continuously inhabited for tens of thousands of years. She came from a Tamil Brahman family, a designation that carries more historical weight than most Western audiences realize. The Brahmin caste sits at the top of the traditional Hindu social hierarchy, a position it has held for roughly 3,000 years. Tamil Brahmins, in particular, maintained unusually detailed genealogical records, tracing family lines through religious and social documentation that stretches back many generations further than most Western family trees can reach. For genetic genealogists, this makes Tamil Brahmin maternal lines among the most traceable in the world. When researchers examine the mitochondrial DNA associated with South Indian Tamil populations, they consistently find haplogroups that are ancient even by the standards of human prehistory. The maternal line connected to Harris through Shamala Gopalan belongs to a haplogroup with roots stretching back to some of the earliest human populations to settle the Indian subcontinent, a lineage that predates the Tamil language, predates the caste system, and predates almost every institution or tradition that modern South Asian identity is built upon. That haplogroup did not originate in Tamil Nadu. It arrived there. The population movements that carried it across the subcontinent trace back to migrations that began tens of thousands of years ago, connecting South Asia to older dispersal routes that geneticists are still working to fully map. The Tamil Brahmin family that Shamala Gopalan came from carried in its maternal DNA a story far older than Brahmin identity itself. This is what ancestry science does that family stories cannot. It reaches past the named, the remembered, and the documented into a human record written in biology rather than language. The maternal line was ancient, deep, and pointed in directions that no Chennai address could fully explain. But it was the paternal line, the Jamaican side, where the recorded history grew darker and the genealogical record far more complicated. Donald Harris was born in Jamaica in 1938, the same year as Shyamala Gopalan, though the world he was born into could not have been more different. He grew up in Brownstown, a small inland community in the parish of St. Anne on Jamaica's northern coast. St. Anne is sometimes called the Garden Parish for its hills and vegetation. Historically, it is something else entirely, one of the regions in Jamaica with the highest density of plantations during the centuries of British colonial rule. Jamaica's history is inseparable from the transatlantic slave trade. Between the early 1600s and the abolition of slavery in the British Empire in 1834, more than 1 million enslaved Africans were transported to the island. They came primarily from West and Central Africa, from the regions that are today Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, Benin, and the Congo Basin. Their names were erased. Their origins were not recorded. Their family structures were deliberately destroyed as a tool of control. What survived passed through memory, through oral tradition, and eventually through DNA. Caribbean genealogy is unlike almost any other in the world precisely because of this destruction. A Jamaican family tree rarely runs smoothly past the mid-19th century. Before emancipation, the documentary record for enslaved people is fragmentary at best, non-existent at worst. Researchers working on Caribbean ancestry must triangulate between plantation ledgers, missionary baptism records, emancipation registers, and genetic evidence, piecing together origins from fragments that were never meant to survive. Donald Harris's family, like most Jamaican families with roots in the plantation era, carries multiple ancestral threads. Genetic analysis of Jamaican populations consistently shows a primary West African component, typically accounting for the majority of ancestry, combined with European admixture from the colonial period and smaller traces of indigenous Taino or Amerindian heritage, remnants of the people who inhabited the island before European contact. Which specific threads run through the Harris family line and in what proportions, the available public record cannot confirm with precision. But one thread in that family history is documented not by DNA alone, but by name, and that name opens a far more complicated chapter. The name Hamilton Brown appears in Jamaican colonial records with uncomfortable frequency. He was not a minor figure. In the early 19th century, Brown was one of the most prominent planners and politicians in the parish of St. Anne, a man whose name appeared on property deeds, parliamentary records, and plantation ledgers that documented, in the dry language of colonial administration, the ownership of hundreds of human beings. Brown arrived in Jamaica from Ireland in the late 18th century and built his fortune through the plantation system at its most brutal peak. By the time British colonial records captured the full scope of his holdings, Hamilton Brown owned enslaved people across multiple properties. The Slavery Abolition Act of 1833 required British colonial authorities to document every enslaved person in the empire for the purpose of compensating their owners, not the enslaved, but the owners, for their so-called loss of property. Those compensation records, now digitized and publicly searchable through the Legacies of British Slavery database at University College London, list Hamilton Brown among the significant claimants in St. Anne Parish. The connection between Hamilton Brown and Donald Harris's family line was not uncovered through DNA alone. It was traced through genealogical record work, the kind of patient, document-by-document research that links surnames, locations, and family clusters across generations. Researchers examining the Harris family's Jamaican roots identified a genealogical connection to Brownstown, the community that bears Hamilton Brown's name, and to family lines that pass through his sphere of ownership and influence. This is how colonial ancestry enters a formerly enslaved family's tree, not through choice, not through documented union, but through the mechanics of a system that gave enslaved women no legal standing and no recourse. The bloodline passed, and the record rarely did. What the Legacies of British Slavery database makes plain is the scale of what Brown represented, and what it means that his name surfaces in the ancestry of the first black woman to serve as Vice President of the United States. The historical irony is not incidental. It is the point. Genetic genealogy does not work the way most people imagine it. It is not a single test that returns a clean percentage breakdown and a map with colored regions. It is a layered process, and understanding what it found in the ancestral lines connected to Kamala Harris requires understanding what each layer actually measures. Autosomal DNA testing, the kind offered by companies like Ancestry DNA and 23andMe, examines hundreds of thousands of genetic markers inherited from both parents and all 4 grandparents. It produces ethnicity estimates by comparing those markers against reference populations. Those estimates are useful but imprecise. They reflect population-level probabilities, not documented family history. A result showing 40% West African ancestry means the DNA resembles, at a statistical level, the DNA of people from West African populations. It does not identify a specific ethnic group, a specific region, or a specific ancestor. Mitochondrial DNA testing goes deeper in one specific direction. Because mitochondrial DNA passes unchanged from mother to child across every generation, it carries a direct signal from a single ancestral line, the maternal line, stretching back thousands of years. It does not tell you about your father's mother, or anyone outside that single thread. But what it does tell you, it tells you with precision. The haplogroup it identifies is not an estimate, it is a signature. The research into Harris's ancestral lines drew on both approaches, combined with documentary genealogical work, Jamaican colonial records, South Indian caste documentation, the legacies of British slavery database, and comparative DNA analysis of family populations. Harris herself has not publicly released personal DNA test results. The conclusions about her ancestry rest on genealogical record work and population-level analysis of her known family lines, not on a direct personal sample. That distinction matters. It sets a ceiling on certainty, but it does not undermine the findings. The documentary record and the genetic evidence point in the same directions, and where they converge, the picture becomes clear. What they converge on is a family history that reaches across 3 continents, through some of the most consequential events in human history, and back further than any living memory could travel. The transatlantic slave trade was among its many other crimes, a genealogical catastrophe. It did not merely displace people, it systematically destroyed the records that would have allowed their descendants to know where they came from. Names were replaced, languages were suppressed, family units were separated by sale and reassignment. The Africa that enslaved people carried in their memories was, within a generation or 2, reduced to fragments. A word here, a practice there, a story that grew harder to verify with each retelling. For the descendants of enslaved Jamaicans, DNA has become the primary instrument of recovery. It cannot restore names. It cannot identify villages. But it can reach past the Middle Passage and point toward the regions of West Africa where the ancestral signal originates. The West African haplogroups identified in Jamaican population studies and in the ancestral lines traceable to families like the Harris line point most consistently toward populations in present-day Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, and Sierra Leone. These are the regions from which the largest numbers of enslaved people were taken to Jamaica during the height of the trade. The genetic signal is not a guess. It is the biological residue of a forced migration that colonial records deliberately obscured. For the Harris paternal line, this means that beneath the Hamilton-Brown connection, the European colonial thread that entered the family through the plantation system, there is a deeper and older African ancestry, one that predates enslavement, predates the Middle Passage, predates any contact with the British colonial world, an ancestry rooted in West African civilizations that were already ancient when the first slave ships arrived. This is what DNA restores that documents cannot. The colonial record captured what the system wanted remembered. The DNA carried what it could not erase. The paternal line, taken in full, now held at least 3 distinct ancestral threads: West African, European colonial, and the faint but present signal of indigenous Caribbean heritage. Each one arrived through a different historical force. Each one left a mark. The maternal line, meanwhile, was pulling the story in an entirely different direction, back towards South Asia and further back still. Tamil Nadu sits at the southern tip of the Indian subcontinent, a region so old in human terms that geneticists treat it as one of the primary waypoints in the story of how modern humans spread across the earth. The populations that settled there tens of thousands of years ago were not merely early arrivals. They were, in genetic terms, among the founding populations of South and Southeast Asian human diversity. The maternal haplogroup carried through Shamala Gopalan's line belongs to a lineage that reflects this deep history. It is not a haplogroup that originated in Tamil Nadu. It arrived there through population movements that predate any civilization on the subcontinent, movements that geneticists have traced to migration routes connecting South Asia to the Near East, and further back to the earliest dispersals of anatomically modern humans out of Africa. The Tamil Brahman caste documentation that records Shamala Gopalan's family line in historical terms reaches back many generations. The DNA behind that documentation reaches back tens of thousands of years further. What this means in practice is that the maternal line Harris inherits through her mother is not simply South Indian. It is a record of human movement so ancient that the very concept of South India did not yet exist when that lineage was forming. The Brahmin social identity that Shamala Gopalan's family carried, one of the most historically stable social classifications in the world, sits atop a genetic history that belongs to a period long before any such classification existed. There is a particular quality to this kind of discovery. It does not diminish the Tamil identity that shaped Shamala Gopalan's life and, through her, Kamala Harris's childhood. It places that identity inside a much larger frame, one that connects a Shania family to the earliest chapters of human migration in ways that no family story could have preserved. Two lines, one carrying the weight of the Atlantic slave trade, colonial violence, and West African origin, the other carrying a maternal signature older than civilization itself. They met in the United States in the late 1950s. Their daughter would eventually stand at the center of American political history. The full picture was nearly complete, but one piece remained genuinely unresolved. The piece that remains unresolved is not a minor detail. It sits at the edge of what current genetic science and available documentary records can confirm, and it concerns the indigenous thread, the Taino and Amerindian ancestry that Caribbean DNA studies consistently identify as present in Jamaican population profiles, but which cannot yet be confirmed or quantified in the Harris family line specifically. The Taino were the people who inhabited Jamaica before European contact. By the mid-16th century, within decades of Spanish arrival, they had been effectively destroyed as a population through violence, disease, forced labor, and absorption into the colonial population. Official colonial history declared them extinct, but DNA tells a different story. Genetic studies of Caribbean populations have identified Taino ancestral markers persisting in the genomes of people whose families have lived in Jamaica for centuries. The signal is faint. It is not evenly distributed, but it is there. Whether that signal runs through the Harris paternal line cannot be confirmed from the public record and genealogical research currently available. It is a question that a direct personal DNA test could potentially answer, and the existing research cannot resolve. That gap matters, but it does not obscure what the evidence does confirm. Kamala Harris's ancestry, as documented through genealogical record work and population genetics, spans West Africa, South Asia, colonial Europe, and possibly the indigenous Caribbean. It crosses the Atlantic slave trade, the British colonial plantation system, the ancient Tamil civilization, and the deepest layers of human prehistory. No single identity label captures it. No simplified origin story contains it. This is not unique to her. It is the hidden condition of millions of people whose ancestry was shaped by the same historical forces, forced migration, colonial mixing, and the deliberate erasure of origin. What makes her case notable is not the complexity itself. It is that the complexity belongs to someone whose public identity has been defined, debated, and politically weaponized with such intensity. The DNA does not resolve that debate, but it does place it in a context large enough to make the debate itself look very small. What the science found is not a correction to Kamala Harris's story. It is an expansion of it, one that runs deeper than any public narrative was built to carry. Her ancestry connects West African civilizations, South Asian prehistory, colonial violence, and the oldest human migration routes on Earth. Some threads remain beyond what current records can confirm, but the picture the evidence draws is clear enough. Identity, when traced honestly, is never a simple inheritance. It is a compressed archive of everything history did to the people who came before.